providing insight and resources for your spiritual journey. Unity Online Radio.
I'm one with you, you're one with me, together we are unity.
Welcome to Discovering Eric Butterworth with Reverend Tom Thorpe from Unity Institute's Spiritual Education and Enrichment Faculty. If you want to be inspired by clear, powerful truth teaching, or if you have questions about what Eric Butterworth teaches, or how you can apply his teachings to your life, please keep listening as Tom and his guests explore the exciting message of this great New Thought minister, teacher, and author.
I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to another edition of Discovering Eric Butterworth on Unity Online Radio. With me in the studio, as last week, is Jennifer Sachs, ministerial student, and let's see, you're a former English teacher in New Jersey high schools, and we're probably going to learn a little bit more about you this week. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Tom. It's great to be back again.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And with us on the phone from Lafayette, New Jersey, is someone who knew both Eric and Olga Butterworth quite well, Linda Pizzuti. Welcome back, Linda.
Thank you, Tom. It's good to be back.
Yeah, it's very good to have you, too. It's always nice to have guests with us who knew Eric personally and can give us that personal touch. You were in church the day this recording was made, weren't you?
Yes,
Yeah.
I had to stop and think. Yes, I was.
Yeah, and the more I've listened to it as I was putting together the tape excerpts, the more I realize that this talk, like so many of Eric's talks, is kind of like an onion. It's got so many layers to it. I listen to it, and I understand it. I listen to it again, and I understand it at a different level. Yeah, so it's. I imagine you felt the same way about some of what Eric has shared in church and at workshops and other places.
I have, and in particular, this particular talk. I was standing here last night with my husband, and I said, I know the meaning of quotient, and I'm not getting how he's using it. And he talked about your Jesus quotient, and I said, I know it's a number divided by a number. Now, what exactly is he saying?
Okay. And what did you come up with?
We had a long conversation about it.
Did you come up with an answer that would do for now?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But what I was getting is that this quotient, our divinity,
okay,
rises and lowers depending on how much we give way to it.
I'll go with that. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
And I would say it is how closely we are living up to the Jesus or the Christ standard in the different area of our lives. Like our intelligence quotient compares us to everybody else. That's my only problem with quotient, because everybody's path is different. And, of course, it's especially good that we're discussing Jesus so close to Easter. And as we know, last night was the first night of Passover. And, of course, the crucifixion and resurrection are all centered around the events of Passover. And Jennifer is going to a Seder right after the broadcast tonight, aren't you, Jen?
That's right. A group of us are getting together to celebrate the second night of Passover.
Well, the second night's as important as the first,
Yes,
isn't
it is.
Yeah. Linda, you ever been to a Seder?
Yes, years ago. I have Jewish friends that invited me. Actually, it was a client, and she was Orthodox, and it was a great experience.
Well, yeah, I remember I've been to, I believe, 3, and each one was different from the others, and everyone was joyous. I know there were a lot of people in the New York Unity congregation and Eric's congregation, a lot of Jewish people, and they were always welcome. So happy Passover. I used to know how to say that in Hebrew, but I don't anymore.
We would actually say Azisen Pesach.
Azisen Pesach. And you know where I learned that from? A Manischewitz commercial. years ago.
How else should one learn it? Exactly.
Well, we're continuing our discussion of our Jesus quotient this week and how Jesus is relevant to our lives. And one of the ideas that I bought right away from Eric is that the world goes in the wrong direction when it makes a divinity out of Jesus and ignores his humanness. Would you two agree?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. I want to play a clip right now that doesn't have a title, but I called it A Very Human Jesus. It's a short one, only about a minute, and I know Jeff has it ready, so let's listen.
There's at least one episode in the gospel story that should give pause to those who insist that Jesus was very God. It was that instance when Jesus whipped the money changers from the temple. For one moment, he became violently angry. Yes, Jesus became angry. His actions are usually rationalized as righteous indignation. Yet he had clearly said, "Resist not that which is evil, but overcome evil with good." Much as we may not want to face it, for a moment Jesus lost his cool. Yes, even Jesus had a Jesus quotient. This means a lot to me. If he could have this lapse evidencing a drop in his quotient, there's a hope for you and me. Christianity has lost the human side of Jesus through the worship of the man. He was an iconoclast. We made him into an icon. To emotionally hold Jesus to your breast, to visualize his face when you meditate, to adorn your walls with his pictures, may well be to lose your way.
That's quite a statement, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
You know, the thing about putting pictures on walls is, whose picture? And is it a picture that's going to work? And Tom, the first time I ever saw a picture of Jesus, Linda, I'd be interested to hear your version of this. He had blonde hair and blue eyes.
Blonde hair and blue eyes.
That's right. And I had no idea that he was Semitic and that he, grew up in a part of the world where the sun shone very strongly and people worked outside. And
He was probably very dark-skinned and most likely had curly hair, and it was most likely dark hair. Linda, do you remember the first Jesus you saw, the first image?
Oh, yes. I grew up in a Presbyterian church, and there was this looming picture in the front. Actually, it was quite lovely, of Jesus standing, and it said, "I am the good shepherd, and know my sheep." And I never gave it much thought. I just accepted it. Of course, well into adulthood, I realized that was not a good portrayal for me.
No.
But it gave me a gentleness coming from the idea of Jesus.
That's a good thing. The first Jesus that I remember, I close my eyes and see which picture comes, was huge. It was painted on the ceiling of the church I went to. It was, about more than 50 feet above the floor. And I imagine that the picture was it was a circle with a good 20-foot diameter, maybe more. And there was Jesus, of course, and God the Father in it. And Jesus' beard was black. He wasn't blonde and blue-eyed like Jennifer's. And he didn't look particularly welcoming either. He looked more like the one who's come to judge the world. I know I didn't get any warm fuzzies from that picture. It was huge. It was intimidating. And being a little Catholic boy, we did not grow up singing, "Jesus loves me, this I know." What about the cleansing of the temple? Have you ever thought much about what that event means in Jesus' life? All four of the Gospels describe it,
I think it really shows us in many ways, as Eric points out, the human side of him. But the fact that all four Gospels have a version of it has me leaning toward this idea that there really were people in the temple who despised him, and there were principles that he no longer supported, and the idea that you had to have the money and it had to be done in a place of worship in this Roman Empire territory that Jerusalem is very powerful.
Yeah. Now, John's Gospel has the temple cleansing right at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, and the other three have it close to the end after he makes his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, I was speaking in a church on Palm Sunday yesterday, and that was one of the things I could have added, but I chose not to. And then after the worship service, I had to go into the church office to get a book or something like that, and they were there counting the money, and one of them said, a good Bible student evidently, I hope you're not going to throw the money changers out of the temple. I said, no, not at all. And I think that story about Jesus is possibly misunderstood. But I do believe that he could lose his cool, as Eric said, and get angry from time to time. If he could not, then what sort of a person would he be? How could anybody relate to that standard of perfection? You know, it's like that cousin who gets better grades than you, is more athletic than you, and better looking than you, and always treats his grandma really nicely.
Right.
I see Jesus as much more human than that. Of course, it took me a long while to get there. And Linda, you had a warm, loving Jesus while you were growing up, and Jen, you had no Jesus at all, really, did you?
No, I really did. Well, my Catholic friend down the street, she was one of my best buds, and yeah. So.
Did you ever go to Mass with her?
I think I must have one Christmas. I remember that was where we went for Christmas dinner. So
yeah, but she didn't come to synagogue with you.
I think she snuck in once in a while too.
Well, that's good. That's good. She was a brave girl.
Yes,
because
she was.
They didn't encourage the Catholic kids of my generation to go to any church but their own. That changed, of course, a generation later. I remember when I was a Sunday school teacher in a Catholic church, going to a special meeting and dinner at a synagogue because they were getting together youth ed teachers from different organizations. So everything is growing and changing. The next subject we're going to get into is this whole thing about Jesus being the man and Christ being the principle. Both of you have studied unity metaphysics. How confusing has that been for you, or how easily understandable to see Jesus as a person who embodied the Christ principle fully? How has that worked for you?
Well, Tom, I remember sitting in your the Christ class.
Okay.
Linda, did you take that one?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. And that idea of separating what is the essence of the man and what is that principle of the Christ. And when we separated it, it was the core. For me, it has become that core essence, our inner divinity that he seems to have really fully expressed according to the different stories that we know. And yet, as Eric puts him, it's also so helpful to appreciate who he was as a real man. Yeah.
Linda, you were going to say something. I think you got... I didn't hear it.
Well, for me, at this stage in my life, Eric... Just studying with Eric and being around Eric and hearing him for so many years kind of cleared it up for me.
Okay.
It just continually cleared it up for me until I got to the point where I developed a discipline to, spend time in meditation. Because I remember one time Eric very clearly said, all of this means nothing unless you're willing to do the work.
That's very true.
In fact, he actually said, you might as well forget about it. He didn't say it to me. He was saying it generally to an audience. But I remember the first time I heard the words Christ consciousness were in some other writings, and it was appealing to me. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what they were talking about, but I pursued it. And of course, I think that was the beginning of my journey in metaphysics.
Okay, well, that'd be a good place to start, wouldn't it?
Yes.
That's a fascinating yellow brick road. That whole Christ consciousness idea. Yeah, that's. Thank you for that insight. I'll use that somewhere. Not quite sure where yet, but I will. That has to be a fascinating thing to contemplate. I heard a real sadness in Eric's voice here as he was talking about how if you make too much of the man, you'll lose ground. You'll lose your relationship with the principle. Now, I know people who are going to stand up and even fight for their right to have a very close, personal, intimate relationship with Jesus. Myrtle Fillmore would be one, and Charles Fillmore would probably be another. What would you say to somebody who says to you, "Don't take my Jesus away from me"?
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. We talk about meeting people where they are, and I want everyone to have his or her own experience of Jesus, because as Linda shared from Eric's words, and thank you for that, Linda, because I had never heard him say that. It's up to us to decide where we are with this idea, and there's that old rhyme: a person convinced against her will is of the same opinion still.
Yeah.
And if that Jesus is working for them, they may not be open to new ideas. It's those of us, Linda, as you said, who could sit in meditation, who could think about it, and try on what it is.
The big thing, I think, is the idea that Jesus invites us to do everything that he did. I've known some people, some good people, who would say, no, he did not. There are things that he reserved for himself alone, that he was of a different quality than we are. He was born differently. Okay, I see the sign from Jeff that we've got to wrap up this segment, and we will in just a moment. But do you see Jesus as being in any way different by birth, in nature, in essence, from other human beings? Either of you?
I don't.
I think that he came into, well, we don't know this for sure, but it appeared that, to me, that he came into an extremely religious environment.
Yeah, I think he probably did.
The early Gospels tell us his mother and her cousin and whoever else was in that group were very devout Jews.
Yeah.
So maybe in that sense, without getting into other writings, in that sense, he had a good start.
Okay. But he didn't have extra equipment. Or did he?
So.
In terms of his nature?
I don't believe that. No, I don't believe so today.
Okay. Yeah, that's the question that I like to ask people, and there's a reason why I like to ask it, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we come back from our first break. And we thank you for listening to Discovering Eric Butterworth on Unity Online Radio.
Our goal at Unity Online Radio is to continue expanding our spiritual programming and growing our listening audience. To help us become an ever stronger voice in today's world, we ask for your support. Please visit www.unity.fm and click on Donate Now. Thank you.
He's the most talked about figure in history. How do you see Jesus? As a savior, a way-shower, a mythical hero? In his cutting-edge new book, Jesus 2.1, An Upgrade for the 21st Century, Reverend Dr. Thomas Shepard explores the many human concepts of Jesus.
The man of Nazareth has been an imaginary spiritual playmate for millions. Best friend, confidant, silent lover, surrogate father, brother, husband, trusted king when earthly governments fail, all-purpose superhero who will save the day before the final credits roll. Jesus is like a program that has been adapted through the ages while the basic code remains undisturbed despite all subsequent modifications. Now it is our time to rewrite and reinstall the Jesus program with updates for today, just as every previous generation has done and every subsequent generation will do. The Romans killed Jesus for being a revolutionary. Every succeeding generation kills him anew by losing sight of the ongoing revolution in human consciousness that he represents.
Explore the new book, Jesus 2.1, at www.shopunity.org.
Jesus taught us that it is our divine Creator's great pleasure to give us the kingdom of limitless good. We are all heirs to incredible abundance, and yet many people right now are stuck and struggling in a place of lack. How do we walk the walk and experience vibrant health, profound love, limitless wealth, and overflowing joy in the midst of a world consciousness of lack and separation? Each week, you will learn powerful and practical tools to experience greater abundance in every area of your life. Hear from experts and visionaries that are living examples of sacred abundance, and have your questions about prosperity answered from a spiritual perspective. Join Reverend Robin Ryder live every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Central Time on Sacred Abundance, only on Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.
I'm one with you, you're one with me, together we are unity.
We now return to Discovering Eric Butterworth with host Tom Thorpe.
Welcome back to our second segment of this edition of Discovering Eric Butterworth on Unity Online Radio. You know, just by listening, you support Unity Online Radio, and your support is important to us. We know that you care. We know that you are interested in what we have to share with you. And we'd also like your opinion. If you go to www.unity.fm right now and click Take Survey, it's on the opening page right below the donate button. I wanted to say the donut button. No, I don't serve donuts, no. Right below the donate button, you'll see Take the Survey. And we encourage you to answer a short survey where we want to know if you'd be interested in a gathering to take place next fall in October, where Unity Online Radio hosts and listeners would be able to get together and share insights and have some fun. So please, if you're at all interested, go to the survey link and see what we have to ask and give us your honest opinion. And while you're there, please don't forget the donate button. Your gifts keep us on the air and keep this kind of programming coming toward you. And at this time, it's also traditional for me to thank the person who keeps the station going and keeps the sound as wonderfully rich as it is, and that's our engineer, Jeff Comfort.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah, if you listen to Unity Online Radio on big parts of the weekend, you'll see that he plays wonderful strings of music. He keeps it running so well here that he doesn't even have to be here for it to sound good. Well, Linda, I want to hear now about your experience yesterday. You had the honor of speaking at your church's Palm Sunday service.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. And we were talking about your preparation process, how you read all 4 of the Gospels. Any insights you'd like to share?
Well, yes, it was an interesting journey, okay. and that's what it was. And at first there I was with this story,
mm-hmm.
and I started asking questions. Why do they call it a triumphant entry? I thought, surely everybody knows, but I didn't have a clear answer. Why is it triumphant? And so I started there and realized what a victor he was, that this was about mastery. And I started reading the Gospels. I read John, and I ended up reading all 4, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and made some comparisons. But the more I read the Gospels, the more I became involved in the story. And it became, actually, at one point, quite emotional for me. So I've heard that when we're preparing a talk like that, it's more about us than the person listening.
I agree.
And
yes,
that was my experience, because I finally went through the entry into Jerusalem up to the garden at Gethsemane.
Well, you took
and
him
it was
quite a ways.
that experience that I felt kind of puny.
Mm-hmm.
Because my reaction was, my God, my story. And my message was, this is our story. This is our story. Now let's see how our story plays out. And I thought how puny my own story is in comparison to what this man committed himself to. So that's when I really got caught up in it.
Okay. Did you end up still thinking that your own story was still puny?
No.
Good.
I think at the very end, I came to the realization for myself that most of all, he showed us what we are. We have the divine potential in all of us, and we call it Christ.
Wonderful. You know, that's a great lead-in to our next audio clip.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it really is. We're going to hear quite a bit of Olga on this one. She's talking about the Christ in Jesus and the Christ in us. So let's listen now.
It's important to be clear on one point. While we often talk about Jesus' divine powers, he never once attributed anything to himself that he did not clearly indicate as possible for all persons. Remember, he told us so clearly, all that I do you can do too if you have faith, and even greater things. There's much confusion in the religion about Jesus, especially in the name of Jesus and the word Christ. The words are usually used interchangeably, which is misleading to say the very least. The word Christ is Greek for the Hebrew word Messiah, or master. Christ is not a name, but a degree of spiritual awareness. Feel that energy in you, a degree of spiritual awareness. If you want to catch the message of Jesus' powerful teaching, you will need to resolve this conflict. The degree to which you do will indicate that Jesus quotient. There's a simple technique to enable you to understand the meaning of Jesus Christ. Put an apostrophe after the S in Jesus. Then it becomes Jesus is Christ. It's the Christ that was unfolding as Jesus. Then we could say Eric's Christ, or Olga's Christ, or Paul's Christ, Joseph's Christ, your Christ consciousness, that energy of pure spirit that is unfolding through you. This keeps us aware of a degree of God consciousness unfolding through each person. The Christ is unique to the individual. Wherever you are on your path of unfoldment, it's the divine pattern that infinite mind is unfolding as you.
Pattern that infinite mind is unfolding as you. That is your Christ, just as the divine pattern that infinite mind was unfolding in Jesus is Jesus Christ. I found that very helpful, the way Olga explained it. Comments?
I think she's very clear about it. And this is just such a perfect follow-up to Eric's piece earlier, that the Christ in Jesus is in all of us. And I remember the first time somebody was teaching that to me. It might have been my minister at my home church at the time. And everybody went around the room in the circle and said their name, the Christ. And what a powerful exercise that was to try that on. And for me doing it there, that was the very first time. And some people were visibly moved by it. And one person in the circle, I remember this, just couldn't do it. Couldn't do it.
Yes, I've seen that happen. And the programming is so strong against doing it. It's been called blasphemy. I've been attacked in Facebook forums and in conversations for equating the Christ with everybody. They said, how can you say that when Jesus alone is Christ? Linda, what would have happened in the church you grew up in if somebody were to say that everyone is the Christ. Did anyone ever make an assertion, anything like that?
I don't believe so. I don't think I ever heard it before I started reading as a young adult.
Okay. So you encountered it first in print. It wasn't in a class you attended or anything like that.
Right. What always bothered me, though, as a teenager, we go to Protestantism has sort of a catechism.
Sure.
And or questions that came up for me but he said such and such. It seemed like contradictions to me, but no one could give me answers. They kind of glossed over it, which people, I think, do today.
Well, sure.
We say,
yeah.
But why did he say, what I can do, you can do? Oh, well, I wish he hadn't said that.
Well, you actually heard people say that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's my conversation stopper when somebody tells me that they interpret the Bible quite literally and Unity, of course, doesn't. I'll just say, well, now shall we turn in our Bibles to John 14:12, where Jesus says, the things that I do, you'll do also, and greater things. That, to me, is one of the most glorious verses in all of the Gospels, certainly, perhaps all of the Bible. And for others, it's a problem. Of course, did Jesus say any of these things? One of the things we have to understand is that what we're reading here is a writer's impression of what Jesus said. We are catching an image of Jesus as Jesus was felt, I guess is the best thing I could say, as Jesus was felt by a particular gospel writer. So we can't testify as to the accuracy of any of the quotations they gave to Jesus. Now, I know that some people would say, well, those words are printed in red. Jesus must have said them. But that's not something that I would accept. We will never know for certain what Jesus said. We can't know. We do know, though, from the testimonies that we have, how he was received by those who wrote about him. Yeah. So you actually heard people express dismay over John 14:12.
Yeah.
Well, they must have loved it even more when they got to the part about Jesus praying that we all might be one, just as he and God were one, and all one in all one. That's an idea that's alien to a lot of people too. The oneness of it all, something that the theologians would call monism. And I've heard people say that this whole idea of monism is definitely something to moan about, but people probably saw that one coming. I want to listen to one more clip before we go, and we have time for it, lots of time. So let's listen to God at the Point of View now.
If you turn on the television or the radio almost any day, you'll hear preachers ranting on Christ did this and Christ did that. Christ taught and Christ healed. But Christ did nothing. Jesus was the teacher. He taught from the Christ consciousness. It's important that we get this clear, that Christ is not a person. He is your God self, your divine possibility at the heart of you. And you may take exception to the bald statement that Christ does not do anything. And use this approach advisedly. It's a teaching technique. It's important that we shock ourselves to the awareness that Christ is not the man. Christ is the divine potential within the man. So Christ didn't do anything. Jesus did. He did it by the power of the Christ in him. He drew upon that Christ energy, and it enabled him to do all things. I use it in the sense of Browning's God cannot make Antonio Stradivari's violins without Antonio. Christ is the activity of God at the point of view. We've been so deeply impressed with Christ as a person that we need to be challenged, even shocked, with a new insight. The power to image, to plan, to outform a violin is in the Christ, our God self. But yet God cannot make Antonio Stradivari's violins without Antonio to make them. And Paul Tubad's hands are needed to wander across the keyboard to find that one lost chord. And Paul is needed, as I am needed, to take the words of truth and the stories and metaphors out of the flow of mind and weave a Sunday lecture.
It's a beautiful thought that Christ does nothing, that we do the work. and that it is the Christ that empowers the work, that enables the work. I'd never heard it said before in quite this way, and it was quite thrilling to hear. How did you feel? Do you recall how you felt that Sunday, Linda, when you heard this from Eric? Go ahead.
I'm trying to get in touch with it. I heard this thought from Eric many times, and it helped me to see I can see it. I can't say it.
Okay.
In my own work, the creativity of my own work, I think what he helped me to realize is how creativity was my nature.
Okay.
And that it couldn't happen. I still needed to be the brain and the hands and the dedication to do it. And I was doing the work, but the power to do it was coming through me.
Yeah.
Did that make any sense?
That absolutely makes sense. Jen, did you have a special response to it the first time you heard something like that?
Well, I was just chuckling when he was talking because I remember the first time hearing a minister talk about Jesus, and she said, and Christ was not his last name. And Eric's talking about this divine possibility in us, not us being this one being, but having all this divine potential in it. It is very empowering. It opens those possibilities. And so it doesn't matter for me per se that whoever the writer of the Gospel of John was, did Jesus really say, these and greater things shall you do? It doesn't matter in the sense of, but that potential is in me. And what I loved from my short time in the Butterworth ministry when the Butterworths were there was they really preached that. They really put that out there in so many ways. It was almost like a little cheering squad of, you can do it, it's in you, it's within you.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
He called himself a cheerleader.
A cheerleader when they needed to be, and also more than a nudge when that was appropriate. Like you're saying earlier, Linda, that Eric said, if you don't do the work, it doesn't count for anything. It reminds me of a story. A lot of people are closer to this idea than they think. A fellow had bought a farm that was in terrible condition, and he worked hard and brought the farm up to a pretty good standard. And his preacher came out to see the results, and the preacher was very impressed, and he said, wow, God's done a great work here. You and God have done a great work here. It's a beautiful farm now. Yeah, and the man said, well, it's a lot nicer than when God had it all by himself. In other words, he was acknowledging his contribution. So many times we think of ourselves as nothing, and Eric here is telling us that we are by no means nothing. We are something, and we're something quite wonderful. That's the spirit of books like Celebrate Yourself, and I think that's part of Eric's gospel, Sunday in and Sunday out. Don't forget who you are. Don't forget what your nature is. It's just thrilling. And I can only imagine what it was like for people to hear it week in and week out. And I'm sure some of them sort of took it for granted after a while.
Yes, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, that happens with anybody. Well, we have one more segment to go, and we'll continue this discussion with the more comments from Eric and more comments from Linda and Jennifer and myself when we continue on Discovering Eric Butterworth on Unity Online Radio.
$2,088 hours. That's how long most of us will spend at work this year. You'll spend about the same amount of time sleeping. So when does that leave time for the stuff that really matters, like your spiritual practice? The good news is your spirituality doesn't have to be separate from your job. It can and should be woven into everything you do, especially in the workplace. New from Unity Books, Good Business, putting spiritual principles into practice at work. Charlotte Shelton, co-host of the Unity online radio show Good Business, brings you insights from some of her top guests. Learn from 20 good business leaders, including Brian Tracy, Rianne Eisler, Peter Block, Daryl Connor, and Margaret Wheatley. They'll show you how to bring spiritual principles into alignment with best business practices to create thriving, sustainable organizations and fulfilling lives for the people who work in them. Make the most of your 2,088 hours. Tune in to Good Business Mondays at 4 p.m. Central and purchase the new book, Good Business, online today at www.unitybooks.org.
How's life working for you? Would it be okay with you if it got easier, simpler, yet more meaningful, more vibrant? Join Reverend Carla McClellan Tuesday afternoons for spiritual coaching, creating a vibrant life. Each week, Carla visits with leading-edge coaches as they explore the sacred purpose and stunning results of this exciting and emerging coaching model. Together, they reveal the secrets and successes of this transformational process. Call in and join the discussion as Carla creates a safe and sacred space to dialogue about real life and real-world transformations. That's spiritual coaching, living a vibrant life with Reverend Carla McClellan. Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Unity FM, the voice of an awakening world.
I'm one with you, you're one with me, together we are unity.
Now, back to Discovering Eric Butterworth with Reverend Tom Thorpe.
Welcome back to our third and final segment of this edition of Discovering Eric Butterworth on Unity Online Radio. I'm Tom Thorpe, and I'm in the studio with Jennifer Sachs, who is one of our graduate students in ministry. And, Linda, your last name just went right out. It's Pizzuti. It's back in my head. There you go. Who's with us from Lafayette, New Jersey by telephone. And Jen just had a question for Linda, and I asked her to hold it until we came back from break. So here goes.
Linda, because you knew the Butterworth so much longer and more in depth than I did, I just had this sense that... when we were talking in the last segment about the Butterworths being cheerleaders, that Eric was a little gentler and Olga was a little more maybe reprimanding sometimes in how she presented things in a lesson. I was just wondering what your sense of that was.
Oh, she could be. She could be. She was very exacting about how things should be. But she, and I think I said Eric lovingly called her his sergeant at arms because she carried out his wishes. She kept the ministry going, and she fully insulated him. And she made it possible for him to do all this writing and the books and the lessons every Sunday. And this, what was he on the radio for how many years? Daily message.
Right.
And so. Yes, your perception is very accurate. And I think she also, I think I mentioned that, is that she would counsel people, and she would say, you can be all you can be, like the Army slogan. And whenever she heard the Army slogan, she'd say, I said that first.
Yeah.
There you go.
Somebody was sitting in church that Sunday and took it from her.
Well, I know when I first met the Butterworths out here at Unity Village in 1989, I introduced myself, and Olga was really standing just about between Eric and me. In other words, I was not going to gain access to him unless either he told her it was okay or she made the judgment for herself. And I remember thinking, wow, she really, really cares about him and protects him. He was quite strong at the time, but still, she was like the mother tiger. And that was devotion. It truly was. Even the weekend that I spent there in New York, I could see just how devoted she was to him and spreading his work. And I thought then, what a luxury to be insulated from all the things that you really don't want to get involved in, so you can focus on what it is that you do.
I just had a thought, Tom, of something you had asked if I remembered anything personal. He used to say that he'd be sitting in his study at his typewriter and later at his computer, and he'd sit there and maybe just get stuck, didn't know how to go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And she'd stand in the doorway, and she knew that he was kind of reaching for the words, and she'd snap her fingers, something he had taught her.
Really?
Snap her fingers, get back to center.
Hmm.
She wouldn't say anything, just snap her fingers. It wasn't that she was snapping her finger at him.
Yeah.
He used that in a meditation imagery one time about snapping the finger. It's signal to the mind to get back to center.
I'll have to remember that.
That's a nice image.
Yeah. Do you ever use that?
That way she didn't interrupt him.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating. Well, I know he had wonderful powers of concentration, didn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, even in his talks. Of course, they were well prepared, but you don't find many digressions. Not at all. Yeah. We have one more audio clip to listen to, and this one's going to take a little bit of time, but it's an important one, and I want us to hear it. So, Jeff, whenever you're ready.
We may wonder, how did Jesus come to know the universal principle? How did he discover the truth? In the same way, all discoveries are made by personal revelation. What we're calling a magical moment of inspiration, followed by discipline and practice. Unfortunately, tradition has glorified Jesus, thinking of him as coming under a special dispensation. God gave him special powers to do certain things, or he was the power of God in expression. But the gospel story refers often to times when Jesus goes into the wilderness, or into the mountains, or into a peaceful garden for prayer. Why would he pray if he was God? What would he pray for? The reason he went into the garden, into the mountains, and the wilderness to pray, because he was not God become man, but man becoming God. His whole life on the planet, inasmuch as we have a record of that becoming, was devoted to his efforts in personal growth, purifying his vision of the indwelling Christ.
As we relate to this man, Jesus, he becomes almost a person that we know, a beloved teacher. That's what he is. But we can understand, we can admire, and we should. But we can be so grateful that he always reminded us. Emerson puts it so simply when he says, man is an inlet and may become an outlet to all there is in God. That says it all, doesn't it? Jesus created a break in the cosmic shell through which he perceived the realm of universal reality. So he formed almost a great picture window through which we can view the panorama of the spiritual dimension of life. And when he said, "Come unto me," it's as if he was inviting us to sit with him and view the reality of things from the perspective he had discovered. His finger pointed out the window, and we've ended up worshiping the pointer. But he was saying, don't look at me, but look to the truth as I do. See yourself in the light of your Christ self, as I have seen myself in that light. Believe on me and the demonstrations that have come through me, and know for yourself what it means that you can do all these things when you make the great discovery of who you are.
The window, the picture window, was to be seen through, not looked at. The disciples were slow to comprehend, but in time they got the idea, and they gathered together the other disciples who came to the window to see the ultimate reality. Generations passed. The contagious influence of Jesus faded. All people still came to the window, but most persons simply stared at the window and its austerity. In time, the window became opaque, with dust and grime. Now almost no one sees through the window. It has become an object instead of a medium. It is adorned with gold and gems. It has become the altar. Millions of devotees have come and knelt down reverently before the window. But only here and there has a clear-minded thinker cleaned the darkened glass to see through the window. It is still there, and the discovery made by Jesus is as relevant as 2,000 years ago. Anyone may wipe away the dusty concepts and have a first-hand and immediate experience of God. I've said before, and I say again, Christ was not born in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago. Jesus was. The Christ of Jesus always was and always will be. He affirmed this when he said, "Before Abraham was, I am." So it is with you. Your birth certificate shows when you were physically born in this lifetime. However, the Christ of you always was and always will be. It is your reality. And you, like Jesus, give birth to it in conscious awareness. In a very real sense, this great God-man, Jesus, says to each one of us today, dare to think the unthinkable. And as I discovered the Christ in myself, you can discover the Christ in you. Dare to believe that the same mind that is in me is in you. And as I have tapped the supermind resource, so you can express the limitlessness of your own mind.
Well, that's beautiful. And the whole idea of the window is something that I've heard Eric talk about before. It's an important symbol to me, to look clearly through a window, to see what the window has to reveal, rather than to worship the window itself. Mm-hmm. You've both heard that story before. I know you have. Do you have anything you'd like to say about it?
I noticed he used the word magical moment again.
Yeah, he did. That's not one of my favorite expressions of his, but I know what he means by it.
Yeah. A moment of insight,
right.
And awareness.
Right.
And I love the window metaphor. I remember on another occasion, using that same metaphor, he would talk about the 5 M's. The man who had a message and a movement sprung up around him.
Right.
And then the machine kicked in.
Right.
To support the movement, and then we ended up with the monument.
There you go.
Right. Well, that idea of the window and a clean window and what we can see, and I think I preferred his word that he used at the beginning. It was a discovery made by personal revelation. And what do we discover when we're able to look out the window and see clearly and to make our own decisions about what that picture is, rather than here we are back to the picture again, looking at somebody else's idea of what the picture is.
Yeah. And no one can tell us what we ought to see out that window either. Each one of us will see what we will, but I'm sure you remember, I know I do, times when a window wasn't clean and then somebody got the Windex and cleaned it up, and the view outside just was remarkably different. Same thing with our glasses. They're really windows too. When you get a thumbprint off your glasses, oh my goodness, do you see differently? But this whole idea again of worshiping the window or worshiping the pointer, that's not just a Christian idea, it's also a Buddhist idea, and I believe we see it in other cultures too. And there's one of the ways where Eric was bringing together different modes of understanding into an idea that was expressed in a way that many different people could accept it. I know that the Jewish people in Eric's congregation really had no problem with the mentions of Jesus. First of all, it was a Christian church, and secondly, the way he did it, he universalized the man. He made him a role model that anyone could follow, not somebody who came to save us from our sins. So as Easter approaches, I think that we not only want to think fondly of Jesus and his contribution, But we also want to think about what Eric and teachers like Eric have done to make the real Jesus, or what we see as the real Jesus, accessible to more people, so that they can use him not as the great exception, but as the great example to follow. Yeah. Any last comments? We've got just a little bit of time.
Well,
I don't know if Eric said it in a book or if I heard him say it in a talk, but he said that after he wrote Discover the Power Within You, that he received letters from rabbis in the New York area.
Yes.
I guess one in particular said that if this is what Christianity is, there's nothing to separate us.
Yeah.
Essentially, that's what he said.
I remember hearing that on a lecture.
Yes.
And we, my friends, are out of time. Thank you both for being with us today, and thanks everyone who was listening. Happy Easter, happy Passover, Hazis and Pesach, and of course, Namaskar. See you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to Discovering Eric Butterworth with Reverend Tom Thorpe. Join us every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Central Time for more insights into Eric Butterworth's powerful truth message and how you can apply it to your life today. This program is brought to you in part by Unity Institute Spiritual Education and Enrichment. Make SEE your gateway to spiritual enlightenment. Online at www.unity.org/education/SEE. Discovering Eric Butterworth, only on Unity FM, the voice of an awakening world.
I'm one with you, you're one with me, together we are unity.
How's life working for you? Would it be okay with you if it got easier, simpler, yet more meaningful, more vibrant? Join Reverend Carla McClellan Tuesday afternoons for spiritual coaching, creating a vibrant life. Each week, Carla visits with leading-edge coaches as they explore the sacred purpose and stunning results of this exciting and emerging coaching model. Together, they reveal the secrets and successes of this transformational process. Call in and join the discussion as Carla creates a safe and sacred space to dialogue about real life and real-world transformations. That's spiritual coaching, living a vibrant life with Reverend Carla McClellan. Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Unity FM, the voice of an awakening world.